Russia used almost all of its missiles, and Ukraine's air defense only keeps improving. At the same time, we have more and more evidence that Russians are preparing a trap in Kherson. And because of such unfavorable position of Russians, they practically beg to resume the peace talks. But this time, they do not even present any conditions. As a result of all of this, it is pretty obvious that Putin becomes very weak and vulnerable, and people around him, they definitely feel it. And so, some of his closest friends started showing the signs of attempting to seize the power. But more about all of this in just a couple of minutes. What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. And let's go straight to the point and see some most recent footage. And our first picture comes to us from Kharkov, where you can see that the city is also in complete darkness. As you already know, this is because almost half of Ukraine's energy infrastructure is damaged. And that is why cities try to save as much electricity as possible. But the good news is that Russia used almost all of its supplies of missiles. According to Alexei Arestovich and some other representatives of Ukrainian government, Russia has only 140 Iskanders and around a dozen Kinjal missiles left. And because of this, the intensity of shelling decreased significantly in the last several days, and Russia right now is simply waiting for more drones and missiles from Iran. And to be honest, the timing of this event is just perfect. Because according to President Zelensky, Ukraine recently received new air defense systems, and they're rapidly moving closer to a 100% protection of the sky. And among such systems are NASAMS and ASPITE, as previously stated by the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Alexei Reznikov. And I guess it is pretty self-explanatory why the timing is just so perfect. In the meantime, while Russia is waiting for additional missiles and drones, Ukraine will be able to peacefully install air defense systems and prepare for future aerial interceptions. And speaking about the drones, I have a couple very interesting videos to share with you. And before we go there, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel if you like this style of daily updating. You can also follow me on Instagram and send me a message and I will reply to you. Okay, so in this first video, we can see the brand new Ukrainian drone called Shark. And this video basically shows the capabilities of this drone, such as for example following a target autonomously, stabilization, and ability to measure the distance accurately with a laser. And then in this next video, we can see this captured Iranian drone Shahid, which is being deconstructed by Ukrainians. The person in the video talks about the basic capabilities of these drones and shows some of its parts. Alright, and now let's get back to some more footage from Ukraine. And our first video is from Kramatorsk, where allegedly Russians targeted a military object of Ukrainians. And our next picture comes to us from Ilino, which is located in the Zaporozhye region. And right here we have a destroyed Russian S-300 missile system. I then also received this video of a Ukrainian soldier, which shows us the first-person footage of the process of a liberation of one of the settlements. And if you want to see the full version and feel like you're in the middle of the combat actions, please consider checking my Patreon. The proceeds will be donated to Ukraine, and you can find all the useful links down below. Alright, and now please allow me to give you a very quick update about the situation in the east. First of all, according to the report by the Institute for the Study of War, Ukrainians continue their counteroffensive next to Svatove, but at the same time, Russians increased its pressure next to Kreminna. In addition to that, Wagner soldiers reportedly entered the outskirts of Belohirivka, and overall, the general concentration of Russian attacks in the east was next to Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and west of Donetsk city. Right here we can see the changes in territorial control over the last 24 hours. And as you can see, Russians were able to capture Chervona Dibrova to the west of Kreminna, but at the same time, Ukrainians advanced to the south of Kreminna as well. And then this map shows us the most significant fighting in the last 24 hours. And as you can see, these circles basically confirm the previously made statements from the report. Alright, and before we talk about almost certain trap of Russians in Kherson, let's really quickly see a couple more photos and videos from the south. And our first video comes to us from Sevastopol, where we can see Russian air defense system in action. Next we go to Odessa, where we can see the way Ukrainians destroy drifting mines which come to them from the Black Sea. Our next stop brings us to the north of Kherson region. And as you can see right here, this is pretty much one of the main reasons why the advancement of Ukrainians in this territory is so slow. As you can see, currently it's a rain season in Ukraine and many vehicles simply get stuck in the mud. And finally, right here we have a satellite image from October 16th, close to Kherson city, which shows us the Russian boats which are kinda trying to hide. And then the next satellite image from the very same location is already dated as November 5th. And as you can see, the number of these boats increased. Some military experts think that Russians will be using this boat to return to Kherson city as soon as Ukrainians enter Kherson, which strongly confirms the assumption that Russians are preparing a trap. And I will talk about this in more details very soon. Because first of all, allow me to give you some very quick updates from the south. And according to the same report by the Institute for the Study of War, Russia started a new phase of evacuations from Kherson, and at the same time, more and more Ukrainian forces assembled across entire Kherson frontline. And then this map shows us the most significant fighting in the last 24 hours. And they happen next to Dutchany, Davidov Brit, Snihurivka and Posad Pokrovsky. Alright, and now let's talk about this potential trap by Russians. It all started several days ago when they removed Russian flags from administrative buildings in Kherson. Then the Russian infiltrators and collaborators fled Kherson, as well as regular civilians and military personnel who were evacuating simultaneously. We even have some threats by Russians who are saying that Ukrainians will be destroying, for some reason, Kakhovka Dam and shelling Kherson city. But as we already established it, most likely this will be Russians doing this, covering their retreat. And ultimately, we had a statement by Natalia Gumenyuk, who said that elite Russian forces retreated from Kherson, leaving less experienced soldiers to defend the city. And most likely, they were simply baiting Ukrainians to enter the city. As a result of all of this, it looks like that the goal of Russians will be to surround those Ukrainians, which is like the most obvious tactics in the world. But I mean, okay. And then today we had these satellite images which I showed you previously, showing the accumulation of Russian boats approximately somewhere in this area. And while Russians might have been able to hide these boats from the plain sight of Ukrainians, you cannot trick the satellites, which pretty much confirms that most likely this will be a trap by Russians. In one way or another, I am pretty confident that eventually Ukrainians will be able to retake Kherson. And I've made several videos in the past explaining how they will do it. I also made several claims stating that this battle for Kherson will be the most important battle of pretty much the entire war. Because as soon as Ukrainians are able to liberate it, they will start advancing across the entire rest of the south. Eventually, they will cut all their supplies to Crimea and isolate the peninsula, which means only one thing, that sooner or later Putin's beloved Crimea will be retaken as well. If you want to access all the maps and additional material for free, please make sure to join our Discord, the link will be down below. And Russians understand their vulnerability in Kherson as well. That is why this so-called trap is basically their last attempt to save the unsavable. And because of this, we once again have propositions from the Russian side to resume the peace talks. But this time, Russia is practically begging for negotiations, because they don't even present their conditions. In the past, it used to be something like this: we will only talk with Ukraine if you will be denazified, demilitarized, if there will be no NATO close to our borders, and if you give us Donbass. But right now, it's more like, come on Ukraine, let's talk. Don't you want to end this war? Why do we need to suffer the consequences so much? Let's just talk, please. But as you already know, Zelensky made several claims in the past that there will be absolutely no negotiations with Russia, or at least while Putin is at power. But there are some rumors that Western countries are actively pushing Ukraine to do these peace talks. And this allows some people to assume that in one way or another there will be some kind of negotiations after Ukraine liberates Kherson. But this time it will be Ukraine who will be dictating the rules. And according to Zelensky, the conditions for these potential negotiations are extremely harsh for Putin, and they include the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity, reparations, prosecutions for military criminals, and guarantees that this aggression from Russia will never happen again. We might even have the dates for these potential future negotiations, but for now these are just wild assumptions. But I'll just let you know them anyways. So, next Tuesday and Wednesday, November 15th and 16th, there will be a G20 summit in Bali, Indonesia. And today, both Putin and Zelensky indirectly, vaguely confirmed their attendance. But most likely, neither of them will participate in person, they will only connect through the internet. And to be honest, I personally do not expect much from this meeting, but I mean, who knows? So let's see. And so, as you can see, right now Russia, and especially Putin, is very weak and vulnerable. Russia does not have too many missiles left. The losses of the Russian army are big, and the morale of remaining soldiers is extremely low. And at the same time, there is never-ending military support for Ukraine, and the sanctions against Russia, they do hurt the economy. I mean, just take a look at this map. Since the beginning of Russian invasion back in February 24th, 2022, Ukraine has liberated approximately 50% of these territories. And so, Putin's inner circle and his closest friends, they most certainly see this as an opportunity. And the question is, which ambitious man wouldn't want to seize the power from Putin himself? And this is where Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of Wagner Group, and Ramzan Kadyrov, the president of Chechnya, they come into picture. As for now, the pro-war faction Siloviki, which includes Wagner and Yevgeny Prigozhin, they increase their influence and try to push their interests in Russia and Russianly occupied territories. One of the main things that Prigozhin is trying to do is to reduce the dependency of the Russian army and especially his Wagner group on Kremlin's support. And because of this, it looks like that he is trying to separate the army from the government while simultaneously increasing its influence on the military. And I mean, it's pretty obvious that whoever controls the army has a very big chances of ruling the country. And then, on the other hand, we have the Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov, who is trying to profit from this war in both ways, financially and personally. And just like with Prigozhin, Kadyrov reportedly undermines the formal Russian army while promoting his own forces. And the worst thing about this situation for Putin is that he needs them both. Prigozhin's Wagner units are pretty much the only ones who keep Donetsk from collapsing. And Chechnya is the place that supplies one of the most elite forces. Unless they're TikTokers, of course. And so, as soon as Prigozhin and Kadyrov realize how much Putin needs them, and I mean they probably already know this, and as soon as they decide to act on this is when they will have an extreme upper hand on Putin. And at the same time, Putin, who already most likely understands this, he just cannot simply dismiss them, because this means the most certain defeat in this war for Russians. And to make things worse for Putin, we have several statements which claim that the number of supporters of war in Russia decreases significantly. These are just the regular people who were interviewed by independent sources, and according to them, the percentage of the supporters of total war decreased to 16%, while the supporters of total peace increased to 27%. Putin is in a very big trouble, both internationally and internally, and we might see the end of his reign very soon. If you want to support my work financially, please consider becoming my channel member, use a PayPal link or become my Patreon. All the other useful links can be found to the right and down below. Thank you so much for your attention, товарищи, and see you tomorrow.